Welcome to the You, Me, and BTC podcast. This is episode 19. This week is all about the demographics of Bitcoiners. One commentator, Annie Rose Strasser, recently suggested that cryptocurrency was only for privileged people. We'll go through her article bit by bit and respond. Another writer, Cathy Reisenwitz, responded as well, so we'll touch on her thoughts too. Later in the show, we'll consider a more realistic concern that Bitcoin usage usually requires a computer and internet access. Is that a bad thing for a currency? Is there any way to overcome that sort of obstacle in cryptocurrency? Stick around for an amazing episode. It was certainly one of our favorites to record as we tried to avoid offending women, bat boys, and old people. Your hosts are Tim Baker, John Stewart, and myself, Daniel Brown. Here we go.
Hi everyone, this is episode 19 of the You, Me, and BTC podcast. I'm here with Daniel Brown and John Stewart. I'm Tim. Anyway, Daniel and I were talking a few days ago about an article that Daniel had read about Bitcoin and how some people see it as being for the privileged. And he had read an article it was a response to the article by Annie Rose Strasser from thinkprogress.org. And from the website name, you can probably figure out what kind of a bent they're going to have to their whatever they write. But I guess I'll just go right into reading that one, and then Daniel's going to look at the other one that he was talking about. But really, I guess I'll just start out at the beginning, and I'll skip around to a few of the more important parts that really don't make too much sense to me. But anyway, it's every once in a while, most recently with the collapse of online exchange site Mt. Gox, the world starts paying attention to Bitcoin, the hacker project come digital currency that has garnered the love of a certain subset of people on the internet. Who are those people? According to an online poll from Simulacrum, the average user is a 32.1-year-old libertarian male, which obviously it must be evil then. By users' accounts, those men are mostly white. Breaking that down, about 95% of Bitcoin's users are men, about 61% say they are not religious, and about 44% describe themselves as libertarian/anarcho-capitalist. On the last point, the political ideology of Bitcoin users is evident from the fact that the whole idea behind Bitcoin is that it segregates economic markets and currency from a country's government. Bitcoin aims to be a universal currency connecting people peer-to-peer instead of through set institutions. It wants to replace our current economic system and practices in their entirety, changing the way we buy goods and distribute money. The libertarians, or anarcho-capitalists as the case may be, don't trust the government to handle their money. They're the same people who want to, in quotes, end the Fed. So, yeah, I mean, even just right there, I know most libertarian, like a lot of the people in the libertarian circles are white, and a lot of them are men. I understand, or I believe those percentages mostly, but why does Bitcoin specifically have this demographic makeup? Well, there's a fair amount of privilege built directly into the currency. In order to buy the sometimes wildly expensive currency, Bitcoin users need to be wealthy, and they can afford to put their money into a currency that isn't widely accepted or even recognized. Plus, they move easily through the financial and digital space. The process of mining Bitcoins demands it. It's all about knowing coding and decryption and how to use an exchange. The sum total of these things, advanced knowledge of computer science and wealth, are also markings of the young white male. Okay, so I mean, right there, it's starting out with this. I guess, I can actually give her the one point about it being that you have enough money that you can put it into something that isn't widely accepted or recognized, but if we're just going off of the white male thing, I know plenty of people who are not white males who put their money into a lot of stupid stuff that does not have any worth whatsoever.
Yeah, I would agree with you too. I think you do have to. I mean, you have to have some kind of expendable currency to be able to buy Bitcoin. But I think she's like way overstating like the technical aspect of this, and this is coming from us who like in nearly every episode we talk about. Yeah, I mean there is a certain threshold of technical proficiency you need to be able to get Bitcoin. But you don't need to know coding and decryption to know how to use an exchange.
Yeah, that actually sounds about the most racist thing in the article, is that apparently females and blacks can't figure out how to use a computer program or something.
Yeah. This is
you can figure out Facebook, but Coinbase, that just gets too confusing. It has all these send and receive buttons. I don't really get this.
Or like purse.io. You just buy something on Amazon for somebody.
Is this a credit card? Do I have to use... Oh, well, no. I mean, I have seen those people on the internet who think that the CD slot is for the credit card. So...
This is just a couple of paragraphs ago. I want to get to it before we get too far ahead and it's lost. The part where she says the whole idea behind Bitcoin is that it segregates economic markets and currency from a country's government. That's a really strange... way to word that.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's like a country's government is like the majority. I mean, it is. The biggest economic systems are obviously government run, but like, I don't know. I feel like the whole point of it is to like break down segregation in economic areas, I guess. I don't know.
The whole first paragraph seems, or the first couple of paragraphs seem like really... Like, it looks like she took her, like, 20 minutes to write those. Just because she just uses a bunch of kind of... Maybe that's because I'm stupid, but, like, strange, just, like, really wordy or stuff that's, like, specifically, like, I want to make you hate these people. They're evil. They segregate stuff. They want well, I don't know. Someone like this I would expect would want a universal currency, but...
No, you're right. At the very beginning, she calls it a hacker project come digital currency. It's like, who are these people? Or who are those people? Like, as if they're some, like, evil group or something.
Well, even the hacker project.
Exactly.
That's like, I don't know. That's a really... I don't know. There's a lot of connotations along with that.
Right. And I think later when, like you said, she says how it segregates economic markets and currency. I mean, segregation is kind of a big thing that a lot of people are kind of tuned to think that segregation is bad, even if it's like segregation from the government, which is what we want. And
I just call that emancipation.
Yeah, there's a lot of loaded words in here.
Right. Going back a little farther down, well, first of all, she says how it's like really expensive.
Yeah, I was going to...
I think this comes up in the response that we're going to get to. But it's like saying money is expensive. Like, you can put $1 into it if you want, or you can put $100 into it.
Yes, but Daniel, not everyone has $100 to put into something they might not have. They have $100 to spend on new shoes or an Xbox.
Well,
but they don't have this kind of money.
We need to get people out of thinking about like Bitcoins and maybe get more into like millibitcoins as like a standard.
They've talked about that a lot on Let's Talk Bitcoin. Just because it seems like whenever I've heard Andreas on both the times he's been on Joe Rogan's show, and I'm pretty sure both times he had to go through, it didn't take that long, but both times he had to remind them that no, it's divisible by like, it goes in like 10, because like, it's 400, I don't know if I want to spend it's divisible. He just told you this last time you guys talked. I'd imagine that's a pretty big... Oh, it's not this wildly expensive thing. It can be whatever I want it to be. I can buy 50 cents worth if I feel like it.
Yeah, exactly.
Another thing real quick is that where it's talking about Bitcoin users need to be wealthy, I don't know if they're talking about it's white people who are wealthy, or it's males who are wealthy, or it's libertarians who are wealthy. But I don't know. Any way you take that is kind of... You can't really say that. And if you're saying that it's libertarians that are wealthy, well, that's something you can change. So maybe everybody should start becoming libertarians, and you'll make more money.
That's the decent.
I don't know.
It's a decent point.
Yeah, Yeah, especially the libertarian thing is really annoying because, like, you can't segregate people based on their beliefs because people can change their beliefs.
Yeah. Maybe she does say coding and decryption to you. Oh, wait. Plus, they move easily through financial and digital space. The process of mining Bitcoin demands it. And then she gives no real backing to that. But, I mean, just to act like she actually did a good job at writing a story, let's say, Daniel, how hard was it to set up the miner? It sounded like you had to do some programming, and I probably couldn't have done that. But
Right.
I also know you were running that through the Raspberry Pi. But I know there are some that you can just plug in, right?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, it really is something that maybe like your grandmother or somebody who doesn't know a whole lot about technology, it really is something that you would need to put some effort into, but it's not like it can't be done.
But I thought you needed to be white.
That's exactly what I was about to say.
White or Asian,
you don't need money to get it done. You just need to learn a little bit. Like,
learning is for white people, Daniel.
Yeah.
It's privilege.
Learning is for white males only.
Free internet education, it's for privileged people, Daniel.
Yeah. One thing I did want to say, Tim, a while ago you were saying how people might not want to spend money on Bitcoin, but they have $100 to spend on shoes, which is true in a lot of cases. There are tons of people like that who think that shoes are the most important thing, and I don't know. But also you do need to remember that there are truly impoverished people out there who can't even afford shoes or things like that. So now I'm not saying that that's a reason that maybe Bitcoin really is bad because really poor people can't buy it. I'm just saying that you need to remember that not everyone who can't buy Bitcoin is a douchebag who spends all their money on shoes.
No, I know a lot of people are, I mean, most of the world is impoverished, but that was more directed, and I should have said that is more directed at people in America if she's saying that they need to be, and again, there are impoverished people in America, but a lot of people I hear, like, it's just too expensive for me. Well, then don't buy all this other stuff, because if you're going to say it's bad, you need a lot of wealth to put into this because the price fluctuates, then why are you buying all this stuff that you can't you can resell, but it automatically goes down in value as soon as you buy it because then it's used.
Exactly.
I mean, yeah, because we have these Air Jordan shoes for, like $300, or maybe this was a fake story, but a while back I thought I heard Kanye West or someone released a shirt, and it was just a white shirt, and it sold out for like $50 in the same day. I mean, that's fine if people want to spend money on that, but then don't come to me and tell me you're bad because you have money to spend on. I mean, I just don't ever buy expensive clothing, really. Yeah, so thanks for saying that.
I think basically what it comes down to is it probably is true that most people in Bitcoin are white or men or technically knowledgeable or something like that. That might be true. But that doesn't mean that women can't do it or that other people can't get involved, that they can't learn or anything like that. And that doesn't mean that we're better than them, or it doesn't mean that we're worse than them. For some reason, that's just the way things are, and that doesn't make anything good or bad. It's just a fact.
I mean, out of the three of us here, Daniel, you spend the most time on the forums and on the channel. Or actually, no, I've seen forums on the channel. They're like, is there anyone else here who's not white and a male? And then people like, there's like one other person, and I don't normally see anyone like going, get out of here. You're not allowed in here. You're not like I don't see that much racism or sexism too much there.
Right.
I mean, maybe it's there, but I don't normally.
Well, there is, now and then there'll be a joke, maybe on like the channel, on the IRC channel, if somebody finds out that there's a girl, everyone will be like, what? How is there girls on the internet? How is that possible?
Yeah, I mean, she seems to be coming from this where she like doesn't realize, or maybe she does, but I mean the internet is pretty much male centric.
Yeah,
there's that joke, and that's not just Bitcoin. That's just that joke that there are no girls on the internet, that it's all just creepy guys trying to be weird with people. But
yeah, and I suppose most of the time it's probably just a joke, but I mean sometimes it probably is legitimately rude, and hopefully we're not those people, but I suppose it probably does legitimately exist if people are like that sometimes, but I wouldn't say it's like a blanket statement like she says in that article. Not everyone is like that.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, even if you think it is like a privileged thing, nobody's making it that. If you think about it, it would be really hard to discriminate against people with Bitcoin, because you just see this address, and most people aren't going to take the time to look up whose address this is, just so they can figure out what color they are or what gender they are. That's the thing about the internet. It makes it really hard to be elitist, I guess, is the word I'm looking for.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, because so much stuff is free, too, but I think part of it might be just that, I mean, it's just more socially acceptable that guys spend a lot of time on the internet. At least it seems like that. Like, the different forums I'll go to, even if I'm not like a member that I just look at, probably like 90% of the people who post there are male. It's just that's more something that guys tend to do. It's like Facebook is the only thing I can think of, Facebook and Twitter, and that's where it becomes more equal, or maybe even a little bit more women. But I don't know.
Another thing that we need to remember and be careful of is there are several movements out there. I know, like, Stephanie Murphy, and I think the girl who spent like a year on Bitcoin alone or something like that. I know they're starting projects about like women in Bitcoin and things like that, which that's perfectly fine. I'm completely okay with that, and I would support them and everything. But it's also important to not take things like that too far, and eventually, if those things kind of take over, things could kind of get flipped. I'm not saying that I think this will happen, especially not in Bitcoin, but it's important not to say like, oh, Bitcoin is male-dominated, therefore we need to make it female-dominated, or anything like that. It's apolitical. Does that mean it's like asexual?
It should be, but just because, yeah, it should be, but like going back, it's like saying that Internet Explorer is sexist or racist because there's more males using Internet Explorer, although, I don't know.
But I know what you're saying. That's true. Like, it's a program. It has nothing to do with male or female or anything like that. Even if more males happen to use it, so what?
Yeah. So, back to the article after that big long thing. But they're not the only ones talking about the young white male. They're not the only ones who are operating outside of our enshrined banking system. Other groups, the demographic opposites of the Bitcoin crowd, are doing the same. The clinical terminology for those people is the unbanked. They rely on informal instead of formalized systems of trading or borrowing capital. Why? The unbanked, comprised of women and people of color, are much more frequently turned down for auto loans, mortgages, and investment advice. Or, when they go into formalized systems, the government isn't there to protect them. Instead, they're taken advantage of by unregulated banking. Unbanked households, on average, spend over $2,400, about 10% of their income, to use services like payday lending and check cashing. I've never heard of women having trouble opening up a banking account. Like, they don't, no, we're not open. They do that with like 12-year-olds.
Oh, you mean like
banking stuff.
You mean like because
like
they're women?
Yes,
yeah.
Like, no. And then this thing about the government isn't there to protect them. The government does mostly this stuff for women and minorities. That's why this gets into another thing, but that's why a lot of people think that there's a majority of white males as libertarians, because I don't know how much I can really say I believe this, but there a decent amount of people say that there's more programs. The government and statism in general is more of a benefit to minorities and women because of the different stuff they can do with it.
Yeah.
Because women can force... Somehow it's seen as something good to force a company to pay you just as much money as men while they're having to deal with you taking off a decent amount of time for your baby. I don't hate babies. I don't hate women. I don't want women to have to stay at home and just be barefoot and pregnant all the time. But I mean, if you're going to have a baby, I think the science shows that you should be with the baby for a lot longer than most people are. You should be breastfeeding it for a lot longer than people normally are. So I'm not saying that they should be paid less because I hate women. I'm just saying because of all the extra stuff that women have to deal with medically if they do have a baby, I don't understand why people think it makes sense then for them to be paid exactly the same while they're pregnant because they're not going to be there.
Yeah, it's hard to explain all that without coming off as somebody who hates women.
Yeah, you sound horrible.
I know.
Because I'm like, no, I don't want to pay. No, but it's not because they're women. It's because they have a baby and you're kind of incapacitated for a while. And I think you should take care of it for a while because you're the person who has this stuff to breastfeed them. And if I was able to breastfeed the baby, that'd be fine. I'd do it.
So, this is kind of getting ahead a little bit, but she's basically saying later on in the article, and I guess a little bit here, that we shouldn't make systems that are not run by the government because it's bad for unbanked people or whatever. But then, like, the banks that she's talking about that are, I guess you have to be saying that they're refusing these people service. Because if the people are just not making bank accounts, like, you can't say that anyone's oppressing them or anything. But if somebody's, like, turning down bank service or whatever, that is the system that you're talking about that you're saying is better for them.
Yeah.
Like, you're saying
It's like,
the reason these people need the system is because the system is making their life harder. It's just, I don't know.
Yeah, I think I follow that.
yeah, she talks in this next part of it. She's talking about Susu, which I've kind of heard of before. They're like, kind of like local lending. It's Susus originated in West Africa and were brought to the United States by Caribbean and African immigrants. They're effectively community banks. A group of people put money at regular intervals into a shared fund, and then at regular intervals distribute out that lump sum to one person in the group. So, for example, a group of 10 people would put in $1,000 a month, and once a month, one person would receive $10,000 to do with as they please. It works simultaneously as a savings plan and a credit plan, all without interest. And Susu participants say that there is more accountability and obligation to the fund because you know the other people in it. I mean, I've heard about stuff like that. I think it's even been brought up in stuff around Bitcoin. It's like a local way of doing the bank. I mean, if you can get 10 people who want to do that, that's awesome. That's great. Anything to not put more money into the banking systems is great by me. But then just using her logic from that, because obviously, what if the people don't have $1,000 a month to put in? Then it's being sexist and racist against the people who don't have $1,000 to put in a month, because, I don't know, it's just not the structures. And she says in the next paragraph that obviously the structures of Susu and Bitcoin are vastly different. But why does that mean one's bad and one is good?
Why does she bring it up in the first place? Because
it has to do with, it's the way she says it's because of how, that's how minorities, and actually she never says women. I mean, she says women at first, but then she kind of drops that and just says it was brought here by Caribbean and African immigrants. And so I don't know, it's just like, this is the good way of doing it because
the thing is, she doesn't even she doesn't really say whether she thinks it's good or bad. It's just like, I'm just going to throw this out here.
Like the next thing says, Bitcoin users reject the premise of a currency backed by the government entirely, while communities of color that participate in Susu are simply shut out from the system that exists and still rely on our country's currency. But the question stands as to why Bitcoin doesn't reflect the ranks of the unbanked at all. Why isn't the cryptocurrency of the future taking hold among communities other than the elite?
Okay, so it sounds like maybe she's saying Susus and Bitcoin look similar. The difference is that there aren't unbanked people because they still rely on regular fiat currency. Maybe that's why she's bringing these up at all.
Okay, wait, she does say this right here. Bitcoin users' rejection of the government reflects the luxury of being able to live well without state support.
Yeah.
While the less advantaged desperately need a larger government role in the banking system to help them overcome a deep systemic bias. But you just said that the banking industry always hurts them and is always good to white libertarian males. You just said that 2 paragraphs ago, where she says, yeah, the unbanked comprised of women and people of color are much more frequently turned down for auto loans, mortgages, and investment advice. Or when they go into formalized systems, the government isn't there to protect them. But then 2 paragraphs later, she says they need the protection of the government, which apparently isn't there, but it somehow still helps them. So, yeah.
One thing that I meant to say a little bit ago. When you were saying how, like, you don't think that women are really turned down for loans or whatever just because they're women, I think I would generally agree with that, although I don't have any, like, statistics or anything. And like I said, I mean, you're probably right. That probably doesn't happen regularly. I don't know, but I think it probably has to happen somewhere, and it probably does happen, you know, here and there. And we should just remember that. I guess what I'm saying is, like, you saying that you don't think it ever happens might be generally true, but that doesn't mean that it. Yeah.
I remember saying that I haven't heard that. Like, and yeah, definitely whenever I'm saying I haven't heard that, I'm not saying like it doesn't, and maybe I did say it this way, and again, I should apologize, but when I'm saying like I haven't heard about it, I'm just meaning like it isn't this epidemic that people like this make it sound like, where, because that, I mean, for a bank, unless they're doing it because the woman doesn't have a job or is living, and I'm not saying all women don't have jobs, but if you go into it, get a loan from a bank and you're a woman and you don't have a job and you're living off of welfare right now, then the reason why they're not giving you the loan probably has more to do with the fact that you don't have a job than just because you're a woman.
Right.
And, I mean, yeah, maybe, I'm sure there are some sexist people and some people like that, and if you're someone who doesn't do business with someone just because they're a woman or just because they're not your skin color, you're a stupid human being, and I don't want to associate with you. But this has nothing to do with Bitcoin.
Right.
And if a bank does that, a bank is stupid.
Yeah. Banks
in general kind of just rob from everyone that puts their money in there. They do the whole fractional reserve banking. So there's not really, they're not going to be like, oh, no, we don't want to steal that person's money just because they're a woman. We don't want to take their business. Because we don't really do anything to earn you any money. We just take it, and then we give you like 7 cents of interest that year, and we get to loan it out and invest in stuff.
I just want to say that if anybody thinks making postal service offices into local banks is a good idea, you must have never been to a postal service, because I really don't want those people taking care of my money. Like, it's hard enough to send a letter.
Wait, how is that supposed to help anyone?
I don't know. Also, another thing, this is in the last paragraph, and I have a serious problem with this. They're like, the fact that Bitcoin's followers deeply oppose this sort of aggressive government action explains why their aspirations to building a universal currency aren't working. By what definition is it not working, first of all? Second of all, like, does this happen overnight? Bitcoin's been around for a few years, like, less than a decade. Do you think that you're going to change, like, 7 billion people, or however many people are in the world, you're going to change those people in such a short amount of time?
Yeah.
It's kind of ridiculous.
Yeah, especially against something as big as the current banking system.
Yeah, and she says the people who most need alternatives to the current banking system are seeking policy alternatives, not libertarian stabs at undermining the state. I mean, she's speaking for a lot of people there, and it seems like she's saying it over and over again. Well, she said at the beginning of the last paragraph, the American system of banking and government regulation has failed at points, but it's worked more than a libertarian system would. Like, you can't just speculate something like that. The last couple paragraphs, it's just a lot of things that you can't really back up in any way at all.
Yeah. I want to know how does she distinguish between the system and the government? Because aren't those basically the same thing? I mean, the government is the system, according to her, right? And sometimes she's like, the system is hurting people, so therefore we need more system. I don't know.
Yeah, you got to work within the system, guys. You got to join the mafia to make it a charity. So
I don't know. With a lot of people like this, it seems like they like to use words interchangeably because you can't really tell exactly what they're trying to say.
Yeah.
And it kind of like makes them hard to argue with. I don't know.
You're listening to the You, Me, and BTC podcast. We need your help. First of all, we'd love it if you could check out our website, youmeandbtc.com. There you can find donation addresses for every single article and episode, and we'd love it if you could make use of those. We could also use some fans and followers, so if you're willing, please visit Facebook or Twitter.com/YouMeAndBTC. Lastly, remember to subscribe to the show. You can do that on iTunes or sign up on our website to receive email updates. Thanks for your support. I'll go ahead. We can touch on the second article a little bit, even though it's pretty much a response to that article and it's almost exactly what we've been saying. But I'll just see if there's anything good in here and we might touch on it. I'll just read the intro, and then basically what she does is she'll quote the original article and then respond to it. So, Think Progress has published a blistering critique of Bitcoin called Bitcoin by the Privileged for the Privileged. That's what we just read. It's full of misunderstandings, misinformation, and, most distressingly, a few points that are actually really spot on and important for Bitcoin foes and friends to understand. The piece points out the unfortunate fact that Bitcoin is now primarily held and used by the most privileged people. This is unfortunate because its greatest promise, I would argue, is for the people at the bottom. I guess I should say the I in this article is Cathy Reisenwitz, and the article's from bitcoinmagazine.com. I'm going to skip it a little bit just till she starts quoting and responding, so here we go. Strasser writes, "The whole idea behind Bitcoin is that it segregates economic markets and currency from a country's government." And then here's her response. "The truth is that there is no one whole idea behind Bitcoin. And that seemingly minor point is actually key. While some person or group of people manage other currencies, Bitcoin is decentralized. No one controls it." I could keep reading, but I think we all kind of understand that and agree. That's what we've been saying. It's apolitical. It's even kind of asexual. There is no whole idea behind it. It's just a thing, and people can do what they want with it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, so another quote. "It wants to replace our current economic system and practices in their entirety." And now the response. Sounds sinister, doesn't it? But Bitcoin is a currency. It doesn't have agency, so it's not aiming to do anything. Some people would like to see it upset the extremely unfair and inefficient economic system. Others want to use it as an escape hatch for oppressive regimes. Many are interested in micropayments and near-feeless remittances abroad. Retailers are interested in a more secure by default online payment system with no chargebacks and low transaction costs. Many people are interested in trustless systems. That's just a pretty simple paragraph describing a huge variety of benefits. It's not just for libertarians, it's for businesses, it's for people who try to send money to their family at low fees. It's for all kinds of things, and it's all trustless, and it's completely new, and I think there are a lot of ways that it could develop that we haven't even seen yet. So, I mean, I don't know if there's much more to say there either. It's just, she's basically just saying how it's for all kinds of things, not just for replacing our current economic system or anything like that, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think so.
Here's another quote, and she mentions gold, how people would, well, I'll just read it. This is the quote. "They're the same people who want to end the Fed." That's what we read before, and then her response. "As a libertarian, I'll go ahead and let you know that those people generally prefer gold, and it doesn't take a libertarian mindset, just a pinch of critical thinking, to realize no one should trust the government to handle their money." That's kind of interesting. She says that libertarians generally prefer gold to Bitcoin. We've talked about precious metals quite a bit on the show, and I don't really know. I mean, I don't know any specific stats on that, so I don't know if we really can answer that for sure, but I guess that's probably true, just because gold's a lot more stable. It's a lot bigger in that it has like a massive market cap. So yeah, I guess that's generally true. If you want to end the Fed, I don't know. That's a good question. Do the people who want to end the Fed prefer Bitcoin or gold? I don't know.
I would say that probably most of the people who like Bitcoin probably also like gold. I don't think that's too much of a stretch to say. So if you include those people with the people who like gold and not Bitcoin, and we know of at least one, Franklin Sanders.
Yeah.
So I guess what she's saying isn't too inconceivable, but yeah, we can't validate it 100%.
There's a chunk of, especially the older libertarians or even the older anarcho-capitalist people who don't trust Bitcoin. Some of them, like Peter Schiff, although I don't know if he calls himself an anarcho-capitalist. He might just be like a small L libertarian. He is really against Bitcoin. But even it's not like they hate it. They're just like, yeah, I think this is a bubble. Like, they normally point to the tech bubble in the 90s. Like, other bubbles kind of around it, and they say it's going to crash. They don't think it's... Well, I mean, I have heard him call it a pyramid scheme, but that was just because he wasn't using that correctly. Can I read part of it? It's still from this response article. It's one more reason the privileged may get into Bitcoin first is that they can afford the risk, which is what I was saying before, actually about the only thing from that lady's article that made sense. The spectacular crash of Mt. Gox put millions of dollars of wealth into the hands of thieves. Not everyone can afford to put that kind of money on the line, but rather than paint people as villains for having the time and energy and risk capacity to get screwed by Gox, we should instead thank these people. Through their sacrifice, we're learning how to build a better currency, which eventually will tremendously benefit everyone. And I think that kind of strikes why Bitcoin's so small right now, is any kind of new technology is always going to... Bitcoin, it's not like cell phones where it's the ultra rich and then it goes down. Because actually, I guess it started with just whoever could mine it, and it was more... But, I mean, Bitcoin... obviously is going to start with people who are more computer literate. Then, I mean, as it gets more and more worked out, just like the same way with cell phones, it's going to come more and more to, with cell phones, people who have less money, and with Bitcoin, people with less computer literacy, to the point where now I can pretty much, and I'm not computer literate. I mean, I'm computer literate, but not like either Daniel or even you, John, but where I can use Bitcoin pretty easily. I don't have too many problems using Bitcoin. It's when I get into other things where I'm like, Daniel, can you please help me? I'm stupid about this, and it's not even that I have to, understanding all of Bitcoin is a problem sometimes, but I can have, like, I can trust, I know some people that I can trust or have built up what I see, like, that they're normally right about things. So I can be like, well, okay, these people who are really very computer literate and have shown they're computer literate, they say they believe Bitcoin is safe. And now, I mean, maybe that's not the best way, and I try as much as I can to actually learn for myself what is keeping my money safe there. But, I mean, for people like me or someone who's less computer literate than me, it's not that difficult to use Bitcoin if you're able to use pretty much any of this stuff on the internet. It's just you might not understand it all. Maybe that's what they're getting at a little bit, but
I wonder if cell phones were ever evil because they were for privileged people.
Yeah, you're allowed to walk around with all that stuff, and Lexuses are evil and all that. Maybe a better example than what me saying before about just any, like, the Internet Explorer. It's like, and this is something I'm interested in right now, 3D printing is not going to be for anyone else besides probably the same kind of people who are into Bitcoin. Not just libertarian stuff, but white males, because right now, I mean, generally white males make more money, and so, I mean, that you can't say that 3D printing is bigoted or something like that, but I think people can get away with saying it because it has to do with money, and that conjures up images of the fat cat white bankers who sit above us all. But Bitcoin and 3D printers are going to get cheaper. I can't wait until I can buy one of those for like $100 or $300. I mean, they're decently, with what you can do with them, they're decently cheap now.
Right.
But, I mean, they're just going to get even cheaper as people get to use them better. And as Bitcoin becomes more and more streamlined, we're going to get more and more people who aren't necessarily in that normal demographic. I mean, that's the other thing. I think the biggest way people hear about Bitcoin is on the internet. So if you're not someone who uses the internet a lot, you're not going to hear about Bitcoin. And that's not really Bitcoin's fault. Maybe that's the fault of people who are using Bitcoin, that they're not running around yelling at everybody about it. But
that is kind of a perfect segue into another thing that I wanted to think about in this episode is, okay, so Bitcoin, like we've been saying, it's not super technical, and you can learn how to use it, even if you're a woman, even if you're a person of color. Yeah, anybody can learn how to use it. It's not racist or sexist like these people are saying. So, okay, good. That's good. But one thing that you kind of can't get away from is that, at the very least, you really do need a computer to use Bitcoin. I mean, yeah, some people have physical Bitcoins, and maybe that would work, maybe. But that's kind of a small project or thing, and even then that's kind of risky because, I don't know, there are problems with counterfeiting or who knows what. But in its general form, you really do need a computer to use Bitcoin. And I kind of want to ask the question, is that a bad thing? Do you think that's unfair? Does that cause problems? If there are people in the world who can't use the generally accepted money, I mean, if Bitcoin ever, or even if it was some sort of conglomeration of cryptocurrency that wasn't all Bitcoin, no matter what cryptocurrency it is, there's going to be people who don't have computers, either because they can't afford them, or they just don't want them, or because they don't have access to them, or who knows what. I guess what I'm asking is a monetary system flawed if it's not accessible to everyone? Is that a bad thing, is what I'm asking? Like, if, say, there were people in the U.S. who, for some strange reason, physically could not use dollars, I mean, would that have any element of unfairness, or would that give an unfair advantage to people or anything like that?
I would say that's a problem that people should try to address. But I don't know, like, everything has problems. I mean, like, what if say you're like a baseball player and you can hit a home run every time, but you can't catch the ball? I mean, it doesn't make the fact that you hit a home run bad or whatever. I don't know. I mean, like, that's still a useful player. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. I mean, yeah, somebody should learn how to catch if they can't, but you still have something of worth. Yeah,
I think I completely agree with that, and that's really a kind of a good way to put it. And we do say all the time on the show how, as much as we love Bitcoin, it's not perfect, and yeah, it's going to have flaws, and that's, I guess, what I'm asking. Is this a flaw or not?
I don't think it's a flaw with Bitcoin. It's just a flaw with the world not being perfect and everyone not being rich. I mean, I know you're not asking if Bitcoin is, like, bad because of it, but there's no way to make something that every single person in the world can use. Someone's going to be blind, maybe that's not the best example, but someone's not going to be able to type on the computer, is not going to be able to afford something to be able to use. I don't know what people use when they can't type, but you can't. I mean, Bitcoin right now, it needed to be something like the internet because it needed to be decentralized. I mean, unless we're all somehow just nationally going to decide to do something like although that's centralized then. I'm thinking like the alternative, like the mountain hour currencies they have in Breckenridge, or just other local currencies, but those are for local stuff. But Bitcoin, it's not made to be a cure-all for everything. I mean, it's made to be used anywhere. Bitcoin's strength is that I can send $100,000 worth of Bitcoin to Russia and it get there in, depending on how fast it's working, in minutes or seconds, and without having to pay all these different little fees. Or not always little, but like the percentage fees. And Bitcoin wasn't just by the fact that it was on the internet, it wasn't made for people who can't use the internet. I don't know if that makes any sense.
No,
but...
I know what you're saying, and I think that's generally right. I mean, yeah, the world is not completely equal. I guess, yeah, as much as we like egalitarianism, and as, you know, it really is something worth striving for in some cases, that doesn't change the fact that a fundamental fact of nature is that people are not completely equal. And I don't mean like some people are better than others, like in the evil way that some people say, but yeah, I mean, if one person has more money than another person, that's an inequality. If one person lives in one place and another person lives in a much worse place, that's an inequality, and that's just the way the world is. And if we can fix that, yeah, absolutely. Try and help people that are in need and things like that, of course. But it is still just a fact of nature that not everybody is in the exact same situation. And that's, I think if you wanted to continue the baseball analogy, even though it's kind of weird, it does work. I think maybe the dollar could be like the bat boy or the ball girl or whatever, who, yeah, you can do your job, you can play a role and get something done, but you're not going to win the baseball game by yourself. Probably, if you're the person who's picking up the bat, you're probably not good enough to be in the major leagues, because if you were, then you would probably actually be in the game. But, you know, the dollar is around, it can do stuff. I'm not saying that all bat boys are losers. I'm just saying it's a fact of life. It is really hard to talk about this stuff without sounding like a jerk. But here's where I was going with that. Bitcoin is like that really good batter that John was talking about. It's better at winning baseball games than just a bat boy, but maybe it can't catch the ball. Just because it can't do something doesn't mean it's worse than the dollar. It means that it solves some problems and not others. It's one solution. You're right. It doesn't solve everything, but that doesn't mean that it's worse. It just means it's not perfect.
Yeah. And I don't get why the articles are like, at least the first one, it's kind of just ignoring the fact that Bitcoin is kind of, people are constantly working on it to make it more accessible. Like, people compare Bitcoin all the time. It's like the internet of money, I guess, which the same way that internet has come from, you had to write down the exact address. I mean, no, I never had to do this, but I've heard people talk about if they needed to go back to the thing, they had to write down, like, the really, really early people, you had to write that down like that. And then that's like saying, I mean, yeah, I guess you could say, if we're going to say that Bitcoin was privileged, or is privileged, then the internet was privileged, because the only people using that were probably the same people, the same, like, white males, because that's the majority. At least that's what stereotypically you think of, like a geek or a hacker. And just because it's easier, but then you see how far the internet's come to where an idiot like me, I can type in, I want to see puppy pictures, something like that. And I just have to put in puppy pictures and Google finds it for me. And I don't have to be like, oh, well, what all did I tell the computer? I told the computer to use the browser to talk to Google, to send me the search results, the 5 trillion search results you get from that. And everything's so much easier. I mean, where do you think Bitcoin, if that wins out, I mean, if another alternative currency beats it out, but where do you think all this stuff is going to be in 10 years? So
I love what you're saying, Tim, because it's like we constantly keep hearing about these new things with Bitcoin. Like every month there's like some kind of announcement, and we have stuff like Purse.io, who's trying to make it easier for people to get Bitcoin. Then we have Dark Wallet, who's trying to make it more secure and anonymous. And it's like, when's the last time you heard somebody in the government being like, we came up with this idea that was going to make the dollar work better, and it's going to make it easier for your life, like everyday basis. Like, even if they want to try to change something, it's like it takes years. They have to do all this lobbying, and then there's congresses, and they have to vote on it. It's like, no, we're just going to kind of make stuff better because we can. Like, I don't know.
Yeah.
Tim, I think what you were talking about earlier, how like you can just Google puppy pictures and all this stuff happens that you don't even know how it works. That's actually a really important concept in the computer science world, but really in all kinds of contexts. And it's called abstraction, where all this stuff can happen, but it's all abstract to you. All you see is the Google search bar, and you type in a few words and hit enter. And everything else is kind of off in abstraction. And I don't think I've ever heard people use that exact word, abstraction, with the way Bitcoin works. But I have heard somebody said, I wish I could say exactly who it was, but somebody said that, in 10 years, he thinks everyone is going to be using, or I think he said a percentage. He thinks maybe like 90% of people are going to be using Bitcoin and won't even know it. And that's abstraction. That's what people say could happen, and maybe that will happen, but that's a really important concept, and you're exactly right. Abstraction kind of opens doors and enables people to use something without having to know every single thing about it and how it works and things like that. And I definitely see that in the future of Bitcoin. Lots of abstraction, which will open doors to lots of people.
Yeah.
Yep.
One fairly related thing that I want to think about is we've already kind of determined that Bitcoin, if you don't have a computer, you just can't use Bitcoin for the most part. And yeah, it's not completely fair, but that's just the way it is for the most part. Do you guys think there would be, and maybe this is a kind of a technical question that we might not be able to really answer, but do you think it would be possible to extend Bitcoin in any way to people that don't use computers? I mean, like, we know there's the physical Bitcoins, and maybe those could be legitimate. I mean, people have come up with ways to avoid counterfeiting all throughout history, sometimes better than others, but maybe there could be a place where physical Bitcoins are regularly used, I guess. Do you guys think that's possible? Or do you see any other ways that maybe we could expand Bitcoin to people who don't use computers or the internet as much?
Okay. I just kind of had this thought as you were saying this. I mean, think about like a debit card. What if you had a Bitcoin debit card and they had like a physical like Bitcoin bank you could go in and say, I want to set up a bank account, which basically it's like you're setting up a Bitcoin address. And the bank account, I guess, would have your private key. And they just give you a card that can be scanned, and it has the information about your address on it. I don't know. Is that crazy, or is that?
I think that actually would make sense in general, except then, I think even then though, at least one of you, either the person with the card or the person accepting the card payment, one of them is still going to have access to the internet, right? In order to broadcast a transaction.
Yeah, it's going to have to be the one who's accepting the payment.
Okay, but that is true. That's definitely a possibility. Now, maybe there's some technical or cryptographic way around this, but one problem there might be, and I guess this really isn't that different than credit cards today, but when you do that, you're basically turning over the power of your private key or the power of the transaction. You're turning all of that over to the merchant or whoever is accepting your card. And they could maybe modify a transaction or...
Yeah, that's absolutely right. But, I mean, if you think about that, that's not really... That shouldn't be such a huge problem, because I think that actually, like, would create more markets, because you can have a bank that makes all these things part of their business model, and then you have this other bank that offers these different services. I mean, you could have all different kinds of people doing that kind of service. And then obviously, I mean, you have word of mouth and everything like that, or in like customer reviews or whatever, I guess, to figure out if these things really work. I mean, obviously at the beginning, some people are going to be taking a significant amount of risk, but I think it's kind of the same way with banking. Like, over time, it will become easier to see what's what.
Yeah, I mean, that's with anything. There's a huge risk at the beginning, but then there's also that reward. Like, the rewards are a lot higher, but yeah, it's... if you get them, but the percentage is just lower. I think that, like, what you're saying I'd see that more working in a place in, like, America where it's, like, it's for someone that just because someone still needs the access to the internet, it'd be someone who either is just older, and not all old people. I have to say the caveat, not all old people can't use the internet, but if they want to use Bitcoin for something, and then someone could set up something like that where it's like, okay, I mean, I'll take you through it. It'd be, I guess, more just like almost like how, who is it that does the tax stuff? TurboTax? Like how TurboTax, although their stuff is the internet, but
yeah,
like any of these places where you can go in and they help you with your taxes, it'd be like that. And it would be just like, okay, I mean, you're going to have to trust us with your money. You kind of just have to, because you don't know, or you don't have time to learn, or you just don't want to learn. You just trade your security for not having to put in the time to learn, and you do it yourself.
Yeah, I mean, it's no different if you just, like, paid somebody a small fee to, like, run your Coinbase account or something like that.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that makes sense. And, like John was saying, you could have, like, reviews, and you could kind of keep track of who's trustworthy and who's not trustworthy. And if a company is, or like a merchant, if a merchant is manipulating transactions or stealing private keys or something, then that's not going to last very long until everyone hears about it. So, yeah. Yeah,
and it might actually, like I said, create opportunities to kind of like shop around for different banks.
Right.
I don't know, like maybe you could have a bank like that where they actually give you your private key and they just have access to some kind of an account where they can manage your money. Or maybe,
I mean, maybe that
some bank has like a lower fee, but then you can only spend so much a month. I mean, there's all different kinds of ways that you could approach doing that.
I think the multi-sig stuff might work there.
Oh, that's true too.
Maybe. Like, they'd run everything, and it's just like whenever you want to do it, you just have to, like, you give them half, or however many, and then you have, like, if it's, you need 2 out of 2, you just give them 1. Although at that point, it's just like, you just come in and just tell them. So, but I mean, I think the multi-sig would help for just security reasons. And, I mean, for anyone who doesn't have the internet at all, I think still the best thing, like, that's what I was talking about. Like, Bitcoin can't do everything. It's not meant for people who don't have the internet or who aren't in an area where a lot of people have it. At that point, you're better off doing like what they were taught, the Susu or whatever it was called, or just a local currency like the Mountain Hours, or any area that's started up their own local currency, or silver and gold, stuff like that.
Yeah, that's another thing I was thinking is, if you don't have any access to the internet, or if you don't use the internet really at all, then you probably don't need to send a ton of money to your family in a different country or something like that. Basically, if you don't use the internet, then you don't really have as much need for Bitcoin, probably. Now, I mean, I'm sure there are special cases and who knows what, but yeah, that's an important point to make. If you don't have the internet, you might not really need Bitcoin. Another thought that I had, and this sort of concept wouldn't really be any better than the dollar, but it would enable people to use Bitcoin, at least on some level. It would be a really stripped down version of Bitcoin, and it would lack a lot of the benefits of Bitcoin, especially since you would have to be trusting someone. But here it is. Somebody could, kind of like you were saying, there could be like a Bitcoin bank, but they could issue their own money that is backed by Bitcoins. Their own physical tokens, physical coins, or physical paper even, physical notes, whatever. They could issue those and have them backed by real Bitcoins that are in their account and that everyone can see on the blockchain or whatever. And then people could circulate those paper Bitcoins or Bitcoin notes or whatever you want to call them. People could circulate those if they trusted the bank or whoever was supposedly backing them. Now, again, like I said, that's really stripped down and that's kind of flawed, but it would be a way to use Bitcoins without the internet if you trusted those people.
I was kind of like laughing when you said that, because I'm just like thinking back the dollar. It's like, oh, you don't want to carry that gold around with you? We got this system, and it's just gonna all history repeats itself.
Well, right, yeah. It is definitely true that could happen, or in fact, it kind of already has happened with Mt. Gox. But yeah, so you would have to trust them, and in some cases they might not be trustworthy, or in some cases they might disappear with all your money. So yeah, there are definitely drawbacks. But, you know, if it came to that, it is another possibility for using Bitcoin without the internet, I guess.
Yeah.
I found, I don't know if this is a response to that article from Cathy, or if it was just written along with it, but it's by that MK Lords, woman, girl, I don't know how to refer to them without being offensive right now. Okay, wait, this one is from January 2014, but she's another woman, so she's allowed to talk about it without sounding offensive. But she says something. The article at the beginning is just, it says Bitcoin doesn't need women. And she says it's supposed to be kind of tongue-in-cheek, but I think kind of what she's getting at is that Bitcoin, whether or not it has a lot of women or a lot of men, it doesn't need to have, for it to work, Bitcoin doesn't need for every single person to adopt it, if that makes any sense. Like that whole, whatever you do to Bitcoin, whoever uses it, whoever doesn't, it doesn't care. It's just Bitcoin. But she says, being the Bitcoin news junkie I am, I came across this article about women in Bitcoin. It's something from Motherboard Vice, I think. And being an active woman in the Bitcoin world, I, of course, had to worry my pretty little head about it. Now, this might come as a shock to you, but believe it or not, there are fewer female Bitcoiners than men. All of those men sure frighten my delicate sensibilities. Why, it's just so scary being around a bunch of guys talking about code and whipping out their dongles, discussing ways to non-violently revolutionize the system. You see, there aren't many women in Bitcoin because there aren't many people involved in Bitcoin in general, and there tends to be fewer women in technological fields. Oh yeah, and a bunch of other reasons the author left out or de-emphasized, like personal preferences and that women tend to be more cautious with their investments, an understandably good thing. But the lack of women is not the problem that the author makes it out to be, because it is perfectly fine if people have different motivations. Men and women will tend towards different interests. I want more people involved in Bitcoin, period. But completely understand if they are hesitant to join because there's a lot to lose potentially.
Thanks for tuning in this week to episode 19. All of the music in today's show is from John Stewart. Remember to visit our website, youmeandbtc.com, and join us next Thursday.